The first sign that something was wrong wasn't the noise. It wasn't the open door. It wasn't even the footsteps in the hallway. It was the feeling, that heavy, sinking awareness that someone else was inside the house with me and had been there longer than I realized. By the time I understood that, it was already standing outside my bedroom door. A few years ago, I was still living with my parents, finishing my last year of high school before heading off to college. That summer, they bought a massive old house deep in the wooded outskirts of town. It wasn't quite a mansion, but it felt like one when you were alone inside it. Long corridors, tall ceilings, empty guest rooms that echoed when you walked past them. The house was over 100 years old. Original hardwood floors, heavy doors, strange corners that never felt fully lit no matter how many lamps were on. Even when my parents were home, the place made me uneasy. So when they told me they'd be flying out for a week to visit relatives, I hesitated about staying behind. But I didn't want to miss school, and someone had to watch the house. I agreed. The first 2 days passed normally. Classes, hanging out with friends, late-night gaming in my room. Nothing unusual. The third night was when everything shifted. I got home around dusk, tired and hungry, my backpack sliding off my shoulder as soon as I stepped inside. The house felt unusually quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind where your own footsteps sound too loud. As I climbed the stairs toward my bedroom, something caught my eye. One of the guest room doors at the end of the hallway was open. That might not sound strange, but in that house, we kept every unused door closed. Always. Walking past dark, open rooms felt like staring into empty mouths. I knew for a fact that door had been shut when I left that morning. I walked closer and peeked inside. Just a neatly made bed, an old dresser, a lamp. Nothing out of place. Still, unease crept into my chest. I closed the door and told myself I was overthinking it. Old house, drafts, loose hinges. I pushed the thought away and retreated to my room, turning on the TV for background noise. About an hour later, hunger pulled me downstairs. The kitchen lights barely touched the far corners of the living room, leaving heavy shadows pooled against the walls. More than once, I thought I saw movement near the staircase. But every time I focused, nothing was there. My nerves felt stretched thin for no reason. Dinner finished, I headed back upstairs. Halfway down the hallway, my stomach dropped. The guest room door was open again. Wide this time. I stood frozen, listening. The house remained silent. No footsteps, no breathing, no shifting air. Slowly, I approached and pushed the door open further. The room looked exactly the same. No disturbed bedding, no footprints, no signs of anyone being there. Still, my instincts screamed. I locked myself in my bedroom and texted my parents, asking if that door ever had issues swinging open on its own. They replied quickly, "No, never noticed anything like that." That answer made my skin crawl. I tried distracting myself with TV, but my eyes kept drifting to the door, half expecting the handle to move. 10 minutes later, I heard it. A soft thud in the hallway. I muted the TV. Another sound followed. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the hardwood floor outside my room. My heart slammed against my ribs. The steps stopped directly in front of my door. Silence stretched. Then came 3 light taps. Not aggressive, not rushed, just patient. My breath caught in my throat. I forced my voice to stay steady. "Who's there? I've already called the police." A lie, but it was all I could think of. Nothing happened. 10 seconds passed. Then the same 3 slow taps echoed again. My hands were shaking as I unlocked my phone and dialed 911. I whispered my address and explained that someone was outside my bedroom door. That's when the scratching started. A long, dragging scrape against the wood. Slow, intentional, like someone testing the surface. The doorknob began to twist, back and forth, back and forth. I backed away until my shoulders pressed against the wall, barely breathing. The operator stayed on the line, telling me to remain quiet and stay where I was. After another moment, the handle stopped moving. 3 final taps, then silence. It felt endless. Every second dragged like an hour until red and blue lights finally flashed through my bedroom window. The police cleared the house. No one was found. But on the outside of my bedroom door, carved deep into the wood, was a long, fresh gouge, unmistakably made by a blade. There were too many entrances to determine how someone had gotten in or escaped. Old windows, unreliable locks, endless blind spots. No suspects, no answers. My parents returned home immediately, but the house never felt safe again. Every hallway felt watched. Every shadow felt occupied. Every closed door felt temporary. A week later, late at night, I glanced out my window and thought I saw a figure standing just beyond the tree line, half hidden in the darkness. When I looked again, it was gone. We sold the house a few months later. To this day, I don't know who was inside that night, or how many times that door had opened before I finally noticed. Next story. The worst part wasn't that a stranger came to my door in the middle of the night. It was the moment I realized I had already let him inside. Friday nights were my reset button. I lived alone in a small house on the edge of the suburbs, commuting nearly an hour into the city every day for work. By the time the weekend hit, I wanted nothing more than silence, video games, and absolutely no responsibilities. That night I showered, cracked open a couple beers, fired up my console, and let my brain shut off. Hours passed without me noticing. Sometime close to midnight, hunger finally kicked in. Pizza sounded perfect. I ordered from a local shop through their app and collapsed back onto the couch, letting random videos play on the TV while I waited. About 40 minutes passed without any notification. I checked the app. Delayed. Generic message. Nothing unusual. I shrugged it off. I was tired anyway. My eyes kept getting heavier, the alcohol making everything blur at the edges. At some point, I drifted off. I jolted awake to the sound of the doorbell ringing over and over. My heart jumped into my throat. Crap! The pizza! I stumbled to my feet, half asleep, brain fogged and slow. I didn't even check the time. I just hurried to the front door and swung it open. A man stood on my porch. He wasn't holding any food. No uniform, no insulated bag. Just dark jeans, a gray hoodie pulled low over his head, and his hands buried deep in his pockets. Still groggy, I smiled automatically. Sorry, how much do I owe you? He stared at me for a moment like he didn't understand the question. I repeated it. That's when my brain finally caught up. There was no pizza. The man's lips slowly curved into a faint smile. Oh, don't worry, he said calmly. It's still on the way. Then he just stood there watching me. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Even through the fog of exhaustion and beer, something felt wrong. Why would someone come to my door just to tell me that? But instead of questioning it like a normal person, I just nodded and closed the door. I told myself I was overthinking it. Maybe he was confused. Maybe I was half asleep. Maybe none of it mattered. I went back to the couch and fell asleep again. A soft clicking sound woke me. Not loud, not sudden, just deliberate. My eyes opened slowly. The video was still playing on the TV, meaning I hadn't been asleep long. I listened. Nothing else moved. No knock, no doorbell, just silence. That's when something nagged at the back of my mind. I checked my phone. 4:02 a.m. My stomach dropped. The pizza place closed at 1. I opened the app. The order showed delayed, then canceled. There was never a delivery coming. My skin went cold. Then who had been standing on my porch? I walked slowly down the hallway toward the front door and peered through the peephole. No one outside. I reached for the lock. It was already unlocked. My pulse spiked violently. I opened the door just a crack and looked outside. The street was empty and quiet. No footsteps, no movement. I shut the door. Click. That sound. The same click that had woken me up. The sound of a lock engaging. Someone had locked my door from the inside. I stood there frozen, replaying the earlier moment in my head. I had opened the door first. I had assumed he was the delivery. I had been distracted, tired, buzzed. He could have slipped inside without me noticing. My breathing turned shallow. The house suddenly felt enormous and wrong. I turned slowly toward the dark hallway behind me, and that's when I heard movement. A soft shuffle. Floorboard pressure. Weight shifting, not the house settling. Someone breathing. I didn't think. I reacted. I grabbed my phone off the couch and bolted out the front door barefoot, sprinting down the block while dialing 911. I didn't stop running until my lungs burned. Police arrived minutes later. They searched the house. Every room, every closet, every shadow. No one was inside. No signs of forced entry. No fingerprints. No trace he'd ever been there. Except for one thing. The front door lock showed fresh scratch marks, like someone had been testing it repeatedly from the inside, waiting, listening, seeing if I would notice. I never slept in that house again, because whoever knocked on my door that night wasn't looking for pizza. He was looking for an open door, and I gave him one. Next story. The first sign something was wrong wasn't the smell. It wasn't the empty apartment. It wasn't even the way the man smiled at me through the doorway. It was the realization that he already knew my routine. What time I came home, how long I stayed inside, which lights I turned on first. By the time I understood that, I was already standing in front of the door he wanted me to walk through. In 2019, I moved to a new town for a job I desperately needed. I didn't have much money at the time, so I rented the cheapest place I could find. A tiny one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a rundown 4-unit building. The complex was old, cracked concrete stairs, flickering hallway lights, peeling paint everywhere. It sat in a rough part of town where most people avoided walking at night. The strangest part? For the first 3 months, I was the only tenant in the entire building. 3 empty apartments, long, silent hallways, lights that never turned on except in my unit. It felt like living inside an abandoned structure with electricity. I didn't like it, but it was temporary. I told myself I'd save up and move as soon as I could. Work was brutal. Long shifts, constant pressure, late evenings. Most days I only came home to shower and sleep. One night, after a particularly exhausting shift, I got home around 8. I had barely kicked off my shoes when a sharp knock hit my front door. It startled me so badly I felt my heart jump into my throat. I hadn't seen anyone outside when I walked in. The stairwell had been empty, the parking lot quiet. I stepped toward the door and instinctively looked through the peephole. I couldn't see anything. The lens was cloudy, scratched or stained, turning the outside world into a blurry smear of shadow and light. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. A man stood inches from the threshold. He looked late 40s, maybe early 50s. Dark hair streaked with gray. Rough stubble. His eyes were wide and alert in a way that didn't match the relaxed half-smile on his face. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he asked, slowly, "Do you live here?" It struck me as a strange question, but I answered automatically, "Yeah." His smile widened. He said he'd just moved into the apartment next to mine and wanted to introduce himself, but he never gave me his name. He simply waved awkwardly and walked down the balcony to the neighboring unit, unlocking the door and stepping inside. Something about the interaction felt off, but I brushed it aside. Honestly, I felt relieved. Having another person in the building made it feel less isolated. That night passed quietly. The next evening, I returned home at nearly the same time. As I climbed the outdoor stairs, I noticed movement behind the blinds of the neighboring unit. The blinds shifted slightly, like someone was watching me. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he had just noticed someone walking by. I unlocked my door and stepped inside. 30 seconds later, another knock came. My stomach tightened. I opened the door again. It was the same man, standing in the exact same spot, wearing the same clothes. Before I could say anything, he smiled and asked if I knew how the thermostats worked in these apartments. He joked about being too old for technology. The thermostats were basic. 2 buttons, impossible to mess up. I explained how to use it. He nodded, then asked if I could come show him because he thought it wasn't working. I told him I was tired and in a hurry. His smile didn't fade, but something behind his eyes shifted. A subtle impatience, a quiet pressure. "It'll only take 30 seconds, he insisted. "I really need your help." It was winter, cold. I felt guilty imagining him freezing in a broken apartment. So I agreed. That was my mistake. He led me down the balcony toward his unit. The door was already open. As soon as I reached the threshold, my body froze. The apartment was empty, not just unfurnished, abandoned. No boxes, no personal items. Dust coated the floors. Paint peeled off the walls. The air smelled sour and rotten, like damp concrete mixed with something decaying. No one had moved into this place. The man noticed my hesitation and turned slowly toward me. "Come on," he said. "It's right inside." His tone changed. The friendliness drained away, replaced by something heavy and disappointed. He took a step closer. Every instinct in my body screamed danger. I backed away instantly and ran. I slammed my door shut and locked it just as his footsteps reached my threshold. The handle rattled violently. He tried to open it. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and dialed the police. The handle stopped moving. A moment of silence passed. Then his voice floated through the door, calm and friendly again. "Hey, what's wrong? I just needed help." He knocked softly. Once, twice. Then his footsteps slowly faded away. The police arrived minutes later. The neighboring unit was empty. No sign of forced entry visible from the outside. But inside, it was clear someone had been staying there illegally. Food wrappers, dirty blankets, old clothes shoved into a corner. He had been living there, watching me, learning my routine. The officer told me bluntly that I was lucky I hadn't stepped inside that apartment. I moved out within weeks. To this day, I still think about how close I came to walking through that doorway and never coming back.